In this video, I'll guide you through my ultimate web development roadmap for 2021 and beyond. We're going to cover a ton of technologies, but don't worry, you don't have to learn everything that we go over in this video. This is an entire map of web development. Most developers specialize in small parts of this, such as UI/UX design, front-end development, back-end development, CI/CD, and DevOps. What I hope is that this video will give you a high-level picture of everything that is out there, and then you can decide which route you want to take. Now, not only am I going to show you all of the technologies, but I'll also tell you how and where you can go to learn them. There's a link in the description below for a free PDF that you can download. It will have links to all of the resources that we talk about in this video. So be sure to download the PDF for reference. Quick disclaimer, if I leave anything out of this roadmap, let me know in the comments below. I tried to think of everything, but I'm sure I missed something. So let's get into it. Well, first you need to understand how the internet works. You need a basic understanding of how computers communicate using browsers, domain names, hosting services, HTTP, and DNS. And here are some great resources to get you started. And again, all of the links to these resources will be in the PDF in the description below. Next, we'll move on to basic tools. We have our text editor, browser, terminal, and design tools. Let's start actually with the browser. Browsers are a very important tool for web developers. They are the means of which end users will view our applications. I prefer to use Chrome as my main browser for testing, but you will want to install all of the major browsers to ensure that your application will work properly in all of them. Just a side note, anything with a purple heart that you see is my personal favorite. So then we have text editors. The text editor is a web developer's best friend. You need to understand everything that it can do to help you write code as efficiently, accurately, and fast as possible. My favorite code editor is VS Code, and it's the most popular for the vast majority of developers. I have a VS Code playlist and even an entire course that will help you become a VS Code superhero. Next, we have the terminal, and you'll need to get used to using the terminal. Now, some are scared of it, but I promise it's not that bad. There are many options for a terminal. Every OS comes with a terminal. Windows has the command prompt and PowerShell. You can also use the Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL, which gives you a Linux shell, but it's not the easiest thing to get set up, and there are some limitations. So if you're on Windows, I would recommend using Git Bash. That's what I use. If you're on Mac OS or Linux or Unix, I would recommend Zish or ZSH. And then we have design. If you want to be a UI/UX designer, you'll need to learn a design tool. I prefer Figma, but Adobe XD is great as well. Other options are Sketch, Illustrator, and Photoshop. And for anything design related, these are the two YouTube channels that I go to, Design Course and Adrian Twarg. All right, so back over to our roadmap. Let's look at the next item, which is HTML. Every web page uses HTML. It is the main building block of the web. HTML provides the structure of a website. It's actually not a programming language, but a markup language. So you need to learn the basic syntax, semantic HTML, forms, invalidation, accessibility, SEO, and best practices. I have an HTML crash course that will teach you the basics. All right, now moving on. Next we have CSS. CSS is another important part of every website. It provides its styling, makes things look good on all devices, and adds flair with transitions and animations. Now, I'm not going to lie, there is a lot to CSS. If you're going to be a front-end developer, it's very important that you understand CSS fully. After you learn the basics, you'll want to learn the layout features like Flexbox and CSS Grid. Custom properties are the equivalent of variables in other languages. And of course, transitions and animations are just really cool. Animations can be done with plain CSS, but after you learn JavaScript, you can look into JavaScript libraries like GSAP and Anime.js. These make building complex animations super simple. After that, be sure to get comfortable with responsive design, including the mobile-first approach, rem units, viewport settings, fluid widths, and media queries. And you can learn all about this from the king of CSS, Kevin Powell. Now, the next three items you can come back to at any time. These are not necessary to learn, but are great to understand. Once you've mastered all of that, you can move on to CSS preprocessors like Sass or Post CSS. I really love Sass. It gives your CSS superpowers. It allows you to nest CSS, and you can have functions and mixins, and it's just amazing to work with. Now, if you start learning React, you'll most likely want to either learn styled components or CSS modules. That makes writing CSS with React much easier. And then there are CSS frameworks. Some people just skip over CSS and go straight to frameworks. I highly discourage that. You need to have a solid understanding of CSS before learning a framework. Now, there are a ton of frameworks out there. The two frameworks that I think are worth learning in 2021 are Tailwind CSS and Bootstrap. Bootstrap 5 is looking really good, and I'm waiting for it to be released. These both have their places in web development. Now, here are some great CSS resources. And again, all of the links to these resources will be in the PDF in the description below. All right, back to our roadmap. Now it's time to choose. All right, at this point, it's time to choose your path. Do you want to become a front-end, back-end, mobile, or desktop developer, or work with machine learning and AI? Now, it's important for me to note that even though I do have this broken up into different sections, the lines between front-end and back-end DevOps and all of these different areas are getting blurred. My advice is to pick out the technologies that most interest you, and no matter which path they're on. There are companies that look for individuals that specialize in very small portions of each path. So pick something and get good at it. It's better to be good at one thing than to be meh at everything. Really quick, hit that like button to help me out and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's get back to the roadmap. All right, so let's go to the next section here, which is the front-end path. So front-end development involves building the interface that the user sees in their browser. And generally, this includes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You'll work with designers and back-end developers mostly. Designers will tell you what it should look like and how it should flow, and back-end developers will provide access to data such as products that will be shown on the website. So let's move down here, and first we have JavaScript. So JavaScript is the first programming language that you'll learn as a front-end developer. It makes the website do things. So you'll need to learn the basic syntax, DOM manipulation, the fetch API, JSON, and ES6+ features. You should spend most of your time on this part. It's extremely important that you fully understand JavaScript before moving on. For those who want to learn a JavaScript framework like React or Vue, do not start learning a framework before you understand vanilla, plain JavaScript. These frameworks are based on JavaScript. You need this knowledge first. And here are some great resources to help you learn JavaScript. All right, moving on down the line here, we have TypeScript and front-end frameworks. Let's look at TypeScript first. So it is a superset of JavaScript. It allows for static typing, and this helps you to catch errors and fix them before running your code. When you use TypeScript, it will be compiled into regular JavaScript on build. So this is a tool that you can learn at any point to make your code even better. And TypeScript can also be used with most frameworks. So TypeScript is great to know, but it is not necessary at this point. You can come back to it and learn it at any time. Fireship has a video on the basics of TypeScript. All right, now let's look at the front-end frameworks. A quick side note, I'm not going to get into the framework versus library discussion. Whether something is technically a framework or a library is not really that important, so I'm just going to call everything a framework. So front-end frameworks have many advantages. You can build powerful single-page applications, keep your components organized, and easily build interactive UIs. And when you're working with a team, it becomes apparent how easy it is to break up an application into components for each team member to work on. There are many frameworks available, but I'm only going to cover the top 4 in my opinion. So React is by far my personal favorite. It's fairly easy to learn and has a great community. Vue is second on my list and is the easiest framework to learn. I have Angular at the bottom. It is very popular, but I personally don't enjoy working with it. I think it's more suited to very large applications or corporate applications. And I also have Svelte on here because I think that it's underrated. I wouldn't use it for every application, but it does have its place. And I plan on learning more about it in 2021. And here are some great resources from myself, Program with Eric, Faraday Academy, and Traversy Media. Next, we have state management. When you're working with frameworks, you'll soon realize how important it is to keep track of your application's state. When you're dealing with many applications and try to pass data and state between them, you'll want to look into some sort of state management. So for React, we have the context API with hooks. This is my personal favorite. It's built in. Before this, everyone used Redux, and that's still a great option today. I just think that with the context API and hooks, it's much easier to just use what's included with React. Then we have Vuex for Vue and the built-in services for Angular. And here are some great resources from DevEd and Program with Eric. And again, all of the links to these resources will be in the PDF in the description below. All right, next we have static site generators and server-side rendering. Static site generators became very popular in 2020 and will continue in 2021. These make building simple things like landing pages so easy, but they're not just limited to that. A common use for SSGs are blogging sites. So with static generators, you get better SEO, file system routing, and great plugin support from the community. Some use GraphQL for data fetching, such as Gatsby. The most popular static site generators, in my opinion, are Gatsby for React and Next.js for React, Gridsum and Nuxt.js for Vue. And then I threw 11t in here because I've been hearing a lot about it, but I haven't had time to really dig into it. It looks really cool. And then we have server-side rendering, or SSR. This provides many of the same benefits of static sites, but moves all of the rendering onto the server. The current kings in this space are Next and Nuxt.js, in my opinion. You'll notice that Next and Nuxt.js can do both static site generation and SSR. These are great options if you need flexibility, and I'm personally going to dive deeper into Next.js in 2021. Here are some great resources from Waveman Colby Fayoc, Gwen Faraday, and Traversy Media. All right, let's go back up to the roadmap here, and next we're going to look at some more tools. There are many more tools that you'll need to learn, and here are the main ones. First, we'll look at package managers. Package managers allow you to easily add pre-built packages into your application. These packages help you to complete certain functions within your application. I like to use NPM. Others like to use Yarn. I think NPM is a little bit more popular, so that's what I go with, but either are great. And then we have build tools. Within build tools, we have task runners, linters formatters, and module bundlers. So for task runners, these are going to help you in development to get your environment up and running. They're also going to help during the build phase to perform tasks such as tree shaking, minifying code, optimizing images, etc. So for these task runners, you can use the built-in NPM scripts, or you can use something like Gulp. And here's a great tutorial on Gulp from Coder. Then we have linters and formatters. These are going to help you to identify coding errors and formatting errors in your code. And these can easily be added into VS Code as extensions. And next we have module bundlers. Front-end frameworks use module bundlers to compile the code that you've written down to regular HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Many of these are built in and require very little configuration on your part, but it's good to understand how these work. Webpack and Parcel are by far the most popular. I also included Rollup because I've used that in the past as well. Here are some great resources on those from Free Code Camp and James Q. Quick. Next, we'll look at version control. Version control is very important. You will have to learn Git and GitHub, especially if you're working with a team. These allow you to keep track of changes, collaborate on projects, and are an integral part of CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment. So for everything open source and GitHub related, I look to Eddie Joud. And I also have some great resources on my channel for this. Next up, we have browser dev tools. You're going to use your browser's dev tools frequently, so be sure to get familiar with their capabilities. There are also specific browser extensions that can help you with troubleshooting front-end frameworks like React. Then we have VS Code extensions. There are many extensions that can help you with various technologies, and I have a video on my favorite extensions. Next, if you're writing a lot of HTML and CSS, you have to learn Emmet. It will speed up your coding time dramatically. It's like coding shorthand. Emmet is built into VS Code, and you can check out my video to get you started. And if you're dealing with a lot of data fetches, you might want to check out Axios. It's a really nice JavaScript library that's easy to use instead of the standard fetch API in JavaScript. And of course, Traversy Media has a crash course on that too. Right, next, we're going to take a look at some other technologies. We'll start with GraphQL. GraphQL is a query language for APIs. It makes consuming data from your API on the client side so much nicer. It's built into Gatsby. And with that, we have the Apollo client. Next, we have progressive web apps. And PWAs are reliable and fast applications. They're most known for their ability to be installed, quote unquote, on devices like a regular application. But they are just web apps and give the user a native app experience without taking up space on their device. One of the main features is the ability to work offline by using service workers. Check out this great tutorial series from the NetNinja. Right next we have WebAssembly. WebAssembly allows you to use other programming languages in the browser. There are other languages that are much faster than JavaScript, but keep in mind that this is not a replacement for JavaScript. So if you're trying to build the next level game or a really complex tool that needs to crunch a lot of data, you'll want to look at WebAssembly. And several languages that you can use with WebAssembly are C, C++, C#, and Rust. Fireship has a 100 seconds video on WebAssembly that will give you a high-level overview of what it's capable of. All right, moving on, we'll look at JAMstack. The JAM in JAMstack stands for JavaScript, API, and Markup. An example of a JAMstack would be the combination of Gatsby and Sanity.io. Sites that adhere to JAMstack guidelines are highly performant, cheap, and easy to scale. They're also super easy to host using Netlify or Vercel. For more information on JAMstack, visit jamstack.org. And here are some great resources from James Q. Quick. By the way, James is the JAMstack king. I really think that we should change JAMstack to JAMstack. All right, the last part of the front-end path that I have here is speech recognition. So speech recognition is only going to get more popular as time goes on. So many people are used to talking to Alexa or Google or Siri. The fact is that people prefer to spend less time typing things. That's why voice searching and navigation will become even more popular in 2021. You can implement speech recognition in your application using several technologies. There's HTML5 Web Speech API, there's Google Speech to Text, and there are JavaScript libraries that you can install in your application that will add all of these features for you as well, such as Allen AI. And you can check out this tutorial from Web Dev Simplified on how to integrate Allen AI into your application. All right, let's move on to the next part of our path. Let's go back down here, and we're going to talk about the backend path. That's up here. All right, working as a backend developer involves managing servers, deployment, APIs, databases, DevOps, CI/CD. The first thing that you're going to want to do is pick a language. So there are several to choose from. We can use JavaScript on the back end. So if you already know that from the front end, that would be an easy transition. You can use the Node.js or Deno libraries for that. We also have Python, Rust, C#, Java, PHP, Go, and Ruby. Those are the top ones in my opinion. Picking a language depends on the purpose of the application being built. So if you're working with very large data sets, you might want to go with Python. If you just need a simple web server and you already know JavaScript, go for Node.js. If you already have a company in mind that you want to work for, find out what they're using on the back end and learn that. In the end, once you've learned one programming language, it's much easier to learn another. So don't sweat it too much. Here are some great resources for backend languages from Traversy Media, myself, Caleb Curry, and FreeCodeCamp. Now, the backend has frameworks too. The same rules apply when learning a backend framework. Learn the base language before jumping into a framework. All right, so for these frameworks, we have Laravel for PHP, Spring for Java, Ruby on Rails for Ruby, Express and Koa for Node.js, Django and Flask for Python, and Blazor for C#. There are some great resources on these as well from Traversy Media, FreeCodeCamp, Dennis Ivey, and Claudio Bernasconi. Right, moving on, next we have databases. And just about every site has some data that it needs to keep. Examples of data would be products for sale or blog post content. And there are two main categories that databases fall into, relational and non-relational, I guess, but you can also call them NoSQL/cloud. Let's look at the relational databases first. So relational databases are a lot like spreadsheets with tables. These tables can link to each other using unique identifiers. And relational databases are more strict and require you to define each table's column and type ahead of time. Examples of these are PostgreSQL, MySQL, Azure Cloud SQL, and Microsoft SQL. There are some great resources on some of these from FreeCodeCamp and Traversy Media. NoSQL and cloud databases are not as strict as relational databases. You can define their data and types on the fly. It's important, though, to understand these differences and pick the correct type of database that fits the needs of your application. While NoSQL and cloud databases may be easier to get up and running at first, you may run into issues down the road as your database grows. Some examples of these are MongoDB, Airtable, AWS, FaunaDB, and Firebase. There are some great resources on these from Traversy Media, Fireship, and myself. And again, all of the links to these resources will be in the PDF in the description below. All right, moving down the line, next up we have APIs. So now that you have the databases down, you need to be able to access the data from the front end through APIs. An API is an application programming interface. It's a way for the front end to consume the data from the back end. You can check out this fun tutorial on how to build your own API from Anya Kubo. And next up, we have authentication. If your site needs to keep track of users, you're going to need to implement authentication. The most common ways to do this is by using OAuth or JWT, which is JavaScript Web Tokens. To make things easier though, you could use an authentication provider such as Auth0 or Firebase. And here are some great resources on that from myself and Web Dev Simplified. Next up on the list, I have blockchain and cryptocurrency. Blockchain is actually a type of a database, but it's not like a typical database. It stores data in blocks and then chains them together in chronological order. You can store any type of data in a block, and it's typically used as a ledger for transactions. So Bitcoin uses blockchain in a decentralized way so that no single person has control. Decentralized blockchains are immutable, and that means that data cannot be changed. Once a transaction is recorded, it's permanent and everyone can see it. And this makes blockchain very secure. You will see blockchain and cryptocurrencies continue to become more popular in 2021. To learn more about these technologies, visit the New Boston and Caleb Curry. All right, moving on. Next up, we have content management systems. The CMSs allow you to easily manage the content of your site. If you're a freelancer, you'll most definitely want to get a good CMS for your customer so that they can easily update the content on their website themselves. Examples of traditional CMSs are WordPress and Drupal. Now in 2020, headless CMSs became very popular and will continue to be in 2021. Headless CMSs allow you to use whatever you want on the front end. You're not tied to using their platform on the front end. This gives you much more freedom to build your application. Some examples of headless CMSs are Netlify CMS, WordPress, Sanity.io, Strapi, Prismic, Contentful, and Storyblock. And here are some great resources on this from Adrian Twarg, James Q. Quick, Jason Langsdorf, and Traversy Media. All right, moving down the road, the next item is deployment and DevOps. This is a big portion of backend development. It involves understanding how to create and manage environments along with deploying applications to the web. So you'll need to understand how SSH works for connecting to remote environments. You'll also need to learn about load balancing, monitoring, and security, and ensure that your site is secure by installing SSL certificates. And then GitHub Actions can also help with CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment. Here are some great resources on those items from DevOps Directive, Eddie Joud, and Anson the developer. Let's move up to the top here to hosting. So you'll need to set up some sort of a hosting service. Depending on your needs, you might be able to go with static hosting like Netlify or GitHub Pages. These allow for easy deployment and can be integrated with GitHub. So this way, every time you update your GitHub repo, your site will automatically rebuild and deploy. If your application requires a true backend environment, you're going to want to go with a more traditional route or a traditional hosting service such as Heroku, Linode, AWS, Azure, or Vercel. Next, we have web servers. So you'll want to become familiar with Nginx, Apache, or Microsoft IIS. These are the most popular web servers in my opinion. And next we have testing. Testing is necessary before deploying an application. The type and amount of testing needed depends on the complexity of your application, but you should learn about these different testing types, such as unit, integration, and functional. And then we have serverless. Sometimes it's referred to as FAAS, and that stands for Function as a Service. Serverless doesn't actually mean that there's no server. It just means that you don't have to manage the server. You only need a server to perform a minor function. This means that there's less infrastructure for you to manage. And the top providers for this, I think, are AWS Lambda and Netlify, which actually uses AWS Lambda on the back end. So here's some great resources for that from Program with Eric and Traversy Media. Then we have virtualization. This allows you to easily create and deploy containers or images of environments that are set up and ready to go. The leader in this is Docker. And then we have Kubernetes, which allows you to automate container deployment, scaling, and management. So that's the end of the backend developer path. Let's move down here. And next we're going to look at mobile development. So the traditional way to build a mobile application is by using languages such as Swift for iOS development and Java or Kotlin for Android development. But if you've already learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can use these to build native mobile applications as well. And there are several technologies that are popular in mobile app development. We have React Native. Using this, you can easily build native mobile apps. Then we have Flutter, which actually uses a programming language called Dart to build native mobile applications. But you can even compile your existing Flutter code written in Dart into a website with Flutter for Web. Then we have NativeScript. JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular, or Vue can be used with this to create native mobile apps. And then we have Ionic. You can build native and hybrid mobile apps with Ionic using React, Vue, or Angular. And here are some great resources for those from William Candian, Flutter Explained, Taras Petra, and Robert Brunage. Next, we're going to look at desktop development. You can use your web development skills to build cross-platform desktop apps with Electron. Electron uses JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. It uses Chromium and Node.js on the backend and is compatible with Mac, Windows, and Linux. Some popular applications that are built with Electron are Visual Studio Code, Twitch, Slack, Figma, and Discord. All right, let's move down the line. Next up, we have machine learning and AI. AI and machine learning is widely used to imitate human intelligence and perform simple as well as complex functions like the ability to learn and analyze information, collect data, understand emotions of humans, or solve complex business challenges and problems. AI is everywhere, so we should really get used to it. It's not going away. In my opinion, Python is the king here, but there are also great JavaScript libraries like TensorFlow.js and Brain.js. You could find some great resources on this from Python engineer Patrick Lober. I have a last-minute addition that I had to include because I haven't seen this on any other web development roadmap. That's soft skills and personal development. These are very important. These are subjects that often get overlooked. A better name for soft skills would be people skills. And these are the top skills that you should invest effort in developing. Communication, teamwork, attention to detail, problem solving, work ethic, time management, adaptability, interpersonal skills, creativity, and leadership. You need to invest in your personal development. These are things that will help you in any job role. Another huge issue that you will run into is lack of motivation and imposter syndrome. You need to surround yourself with people who are supportive and understand that you're not alone. An amazing resource for motivation and dealing with imposter syndrome is Danny Thompson. Check him out on YouTube and Twitter. And again, all of the links to these resources will be in the PDF in the description below. So there are a few technologies that were not included in the roadmap, but they should still be mentioned. So first up is this low-code, no-code thing. There are several platforms that provide the ability to create websites and applications with very little to no web development knowledge. And these are the platforms that scare a lot of developers and make them believe that their jobs might be taken by these platforms. My advice is to not worry about this too much. The platforms themselves require web developers to build and maintain them. And these platforms are targeting an audience that needs a very basic site or application. These can't require any advanced customization or any complex programming requirements. Also, these applications don't scale very well. So once the company grows out of this basic app, they're going to be looking for an actual web developer to help them. Another technology is VR and AR. Virtual reality and augmented reality are getting very popular. They are still in their infancy, but they're going to continue to grow in 2021. So look out for those technologies. We covered a bunch of technologies in this video. So if you made it to the end, your brain must be fried. Thank you for watching. Just remember that you don't have to learn everything that we covered. Focus on the technologies that are used in your current job or your aspiring job. So if your current employer uses Angular, Focus on Angular. If the company that you're interviewing with uses React, then focus on React before your interview. Then you can learn other technologies in your spare time, if you have any. Once you've gotten comfortable with JavaScript and you want to learn some Python in your spare time, then do it. It is hard to stay up to date with technologies and current trends, but just know that most companies don't always use the most up-to-date technologies. Keep an eye out for new technologies, but focus on one at a time. Learning something new takes time. It takes time to get good at something. So take your time, be patient, never stop learning, and never give up. That's going to be it for this video. Like this video to help me out, and subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this.